oven. And the next year when I came back, guess what? I was putting out the presents underneath the tree, and just as I was getting ready to head back up the fireplace and take off, I looked around because most children leave me a snack. And sure enough, there was a little table, and on the table was a white porcelain dish with gold trim. And on that dish was 3 cookies. And right next to it was a little tent that said, Santa, I made these cookies with my Easy Bake Oven. Love, Molly. And I was so impressed because, well, first off, she was only 5 years old when she made the promise, but she remembered it. And so right next to that table was a tall glass of cold milk. You guys like milk with your cookies, right? Oh, yeah, I love that. So this was really nice and cold. I could see the water beating on the side of it and starting to drizzle down. So I just knew this was going to be one of those moments that I would really treasure. So I reached over and I picked up one of the cookies. And I'm looking at it. I mean, it was like round, perfectly round, kind of rounded on top, flat on the bottom, just like a good homemade cookie should be. No burn marks anywhere. So I'm getting ready to take the bite of the cookie just as I'm bringing it up to my lips. You know what I did? I remembered I forgot to dip it in the milk. So I reached over and you guys dip your cookies in milk? No, that's sometimes. What do you do the other times? You take a bite of the cookie and a sip of the milk? Yeah. Well, that's a safe thing to do, especially if you don't want to get cookie on your clothes, because you know what I do? I have found that if you leave the cookie in the milk too long, you know what happens, right?
It gets all mushy.
It gets all soggy, and then what happens if you still leave it there? It breaks off and falls down in the bottom of the glass, right? And that's just a mess there. So, you know, some people, they'll try it because the more milk you get in there, the better the cookie. So they haven't learned, this is why you got to stay in school, they haven't learned how to properly calculate the cookie milk saturation point. But through complex mathematics, where you look at the size of the cookie and the temperature of the milk and the temperature of the room, you know just how many milliseconds to leave it in there. I've got this down to a science. But in the beginning, I used to have that problem where I'd bring the cookie and it'd fall in my beard because it would all crumble up. Then the birds would chase me, so I had to learn. You guys don't have that problem, do you? No beards? Okay. So what happens is, I'm holding it there, I'm counting off the milliseconds, and I can do that. And so as I bring the cookie over to my mouth, I'm getting ready to take a bite. I mean, you could see the Christmas tree lights reflecting off the milk in the pores of the cookie. It was just really just saturated just right. So I get it up to my mouth, and I take a bite, and guess what? It was the worst cookie I ever bit into. You know why? Molly, even though it was made with love, she also put spinach in it, which was not a good idea. Yeah, exactly. You know, spinach is really good for you, and you should enjoy your spinach. And cookies are always good, but the two should never be put together. So I didn't want to upset Molly, because after all, she did keep her promise. So you know what I did? I put my gloves back on, and I crumpled up the cookies, and I took them up to the reindeer, and I gave a little bit up to each one, kind of a little treat. And then what happened was, well, reindeer never ate spinach before because it doesn't grow up north. And I was the first one to ever give reindeer spinach. And you know what happens when you give a reindeer spinach? It gives them gas. So here I am. You know, I like to call them by name. So all of a sudden I go, on Dancer, on Dasher, and all of a sudden, or reverse, and all of a sudden I hear that, you know, and I thought, oh my gosh, is there a child up trying to sneak a peek? And I look around, I didn't see anybody, so I continued on, but by the time I got to Donder and Blitzen, you know what happened? I heard that, you know, and then it hit me. The smell of reindeer processed spinach, and it did not smell good. You know what? So I try to be very, very quiet on Christmas Eve as I pass out presents so as not to wake the children. Sometimes I make a little too much noise and it happens. But this night I was trying to keep the reindeer quiet, and they were playing their own music, if you know what I mean, as we traveled from rooftop to rooftop. So what I did was, we made it through the night. I got all the presents passed out. And now I'm all the way down by the South Pole. And I got to get back home. Now, normally I just relax. The work is all done. The reindeer know the way home. We've got a few elves with us that happen to hang out on the shelves, you know, and so they're hitching a ride back to the North Pole. And but this night was the longest ride I ever had because I was downwind of a bunch of gassy reindeer. But I finally got home, and I turned the reindeer over to the stable elves. Now, The stable elves are the ones that unharness them and give them a fresh bed of straw. And because they've been working all night. They left the North Pole pulling me and a sleigh full of toys. They came back to the North Pole pulling me with a belly full of cookies and milk. So, hard-working girls and boys. So, finally, the stable elves take over. I go in. Mrs. Claus greets me with a cup of hot cocoa because it was cold. And I take off my boots and I put my feet up on the footstool and I rest in my big easy chair drinking that hot cocoa. Now, Mrs. Claus, she likes to go out and check up on everything, make sure, all the elves have put stuff away, And then, before we go to bed, she also checks up on the reindeer. So she goes out and she comes back in and she goes, Santa, I was just out in the stables and the elves are all running around with clothespins on their noses. What is that terrible smell? So I had to tell her the story about Molly and the Easy Bake Oven and the spinach cookies and how they crumbled them up and gave them to the reindeer. And then, the reindeer were passing gas. And, by the time I got through telling the story, she was rolling around on the floor laughing so hard. And it was really a funny sight. But if you ever see Mrs. Claus, don't tell her I said that, okay? Because she'll get mad at me. But anyway, she finally got up and she said, you know what, Santa? Children are always asking you your favorite cookie, and you tell them you don't know. But now you can tell them at least what kind of cookie you don't like. So since that time, I'm really happy to say nobody else has ever left me a spinach cookie. But this year, Molly's 57 years old, and she's got a granddaughter, and guess what her granddaughter asked me for? An Easy Bake Oven. I'm just hoping Molly doesn't give her her spinach cookie recipe. That would be sad. So, anyway.